My mom showed up at my door and said, "Your sister starts college next year. Give her this apartment so she can get used to it." So, I responded, "Or you could kick her out like you did to me and let her figure it out herself." I remember laughing, one short, ugly laugh that didn't sound like me, because the last time my mom stood in a doorway talking about my sister, she was watching me carry my whole life out in a duffel bag. I was 18 then, 3 weeks past graduation, and she gave me until sundown to be gone. No fight, no warning, just a calendar date she'd apparently circled in her head months earlier. That was how I left home, not with a party or a cake, but with a torn duffel, $80, and a bus pass that expired in 4 days. I wasn't a problem kid. That's the part people never believe. No arrests, no drugs, no screaming matches, no girl pregnant across town. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner, carried a 3.9 GPA, and had a folder on my laptop labeled community college in case I ever scraped the money together. None of it counted for anything, because in my house there were 2 kinds of children, and I was the wrong kind. My sister Sadie was 2 years younger and lived in a different family than I did, even though we shared a hallway. She was the miracle, the late blessing, the one my mom cried about at church. When Sadie brought home a B, they framed it. When I brought home an A, they asked why it wasn't 2. She got dance lessons and a used Civic on her 16th birthday. I got her outgrown backpacks and a lecture about gratitude. Once she cracked her phone screen and had a new one by Friday. Once my only pair of work shoes split down the sole, and my mom told me I clearly didn't respect nice things. I stopped asking why a long time ago. Every time I did, my mom would tilt her head and say, "Life isn't fair, Owen. The sooner you learn that, the better." And then she'd go help Sadie with something. So I learned it. I learned it so well that when she gave me until sundown, I didn't even argue. I just packed. The first month out was a slow kind of drowning. I slept 2 nights on a coworker's floor before his girlfriend got tired of me. I spent 1 night in the diner's supply closet with my head on a box of napkins because it was safer than the bus station. Eventually, I found a room in a house with 3 other guys, rent split 4 ways, everything smelling like old carpet and cheap cologne. One of them barely spoke. One of them owed everyone money, and one of them, a night shift nurse named Ronnie, quietly saved me. He never made a big deal of it. He'd just leave half a sandwich on the counter with my name on a sticky note, or knock on my door with 2 coffees when he saw my light on before an exam. Ronnie taught me how to fix a bike, how to file taxes, how to sit with somebody who's falling apart without trying to fix them. He was more of a parent in 8 months than mine had been in 18 years. It took me 4 years to stop drowning. I worked everything. Warehouse nights, rideshare mornings, weekends restocking a hardware store where the fluorescent lights buzzed like they were angry at me. I took online classes between shifts, slept in 90-minute pieces, and eventually earned a degree in accounting because I'd decided that if the world was going to keep count of everything I didn't have, I was going to learn to count better than all of them. It wasn't glamorous. It was mine. No help, no safety net, no quiet envelope of cash slid across a table. Just me, a cracked laptop, and a stubbornness that scared people. There were nights I ate dry cereal for dinner 3 days running and called it a diet so it wouldn't feel like poverty. There was a winter my car died, and I biked to a warehouse shift through sleet because missing it meant missing rent. And I remember thinking that at least the cold was honest about wanting me gone. Ronnie eventually moved 2 states away for a better hospital job, and I cried in the bathroom the morning he left. Not over the room, but because he was the only person alive who'd ever checked whether I'd eaten. I picked accounting on purpose. I'd spent my whole childhood being told there was never enough, and I wanted to be the one person in the room who could actually read the numbers and know exactly when someone was lying with them. I didn't know yet how useful that would turn out to be. By 26, I had a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a decent building, a car that started every time, and a job doing books for a mid-sized property firm. For the first time in my life, my hands didn't shake when the phone rang. I didn't think about them much. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I wasn't bitter exactly, or at least I told myself I wasn't. I just figured that if I hadn't been worth keeping, I sure wasn't worth crawling back to. And then one Sunday morning, the drowning came back for a second try. It started with a knock. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient in a way that made my skin crawl before I even knew who it was. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach dropped through the floor. My mom. Same posture, same set jaw, same handbag she'd carried my entire childhood. Half a step behind her stood my dad. Quieter now, grayer, the kind of man who'd spent 30 years agreeing with whatever she decided. My first thought wasn't why are they here? It was how do they know where I live? I opened the door but didn't move out of the frame. "Owen," my mom said, smiling like we'd just missed each other at a wedding. "Look at you, all grown up." "What do you want?" I said. Not a question. She didn't wait for an invitation. She just angled past me like the apartment already belonged to her, and my dad followed with an apologetic little nod, and then they were sitting on my couch, in my home, filling it with a smell I hadn't missed. My mom looked around slowly, the way you'd inspect a rental for damage. My dad stared at his hands. "We've had a hard couple of years," she began, folding her hands in her lap. I said nothing. "It's about your sister," she said. Of course it was. It was always about my sister. "What about her?" I said. My mom sighed like I was making this difficult. "Sadie's starting college in the fall. The good one. The one across the river. ever. And you know how those first-year dorms are, packed in like animals, terrible for a girl like her. We think it would be good for her to have somewhere stable, somewhere that's already set up. I felt the cold start in my chest and spread. Somewhere like where? I said. She looked around my living room again, and this time she let the look land. This is a nice place, Owen. It's close to campus, and you're doing so well, you could find something else easily. It would only be temporary until she gets settled. Family helps family. Family helps family. 3 words, and every one of them was a knife with my own fingerprints on it. This was the family that gave me until sundown. The family that turned my childhood bedroom into a home gym before my bus even reached the next county. I set my coffee down very carefully because I did not trust my hands. Let me make sure I understand, I said. You threw me out at 18 with a duffel bag and $80. You didn't call me for 8 years. And now you drove across 2 counties to ask me to hand my apartment to Sadie so she doesn't have to sleep in a dorm. When you say it like that, you make it sound ugly, my mom said. It sounds ugly because it is. My dad finally spoke, soft and useless. She's your sister, Owen. You don't turn your back on family. I looked at him for a long second. You're going to lecture me about that. You. The room went quiet. My mom's smile thinned into the expression I remembered from 100 dinners, the one that meant I'd embarrassed her by existing. You've always been so sensitive, she said. Sadie isn't like you. She doesn't handle hardship the way you do. She feels things deeply. And I don't, I said. I just never got the option. They stayed another 10 minutes. My mom cycling through the same 3 arguments. My dad nodding along like a bobblehead. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said I'd think about it, mostly to get them out of my apartment before I said something I couldn't take back. They left without the answer they wanted, but I watched my mom pause at my door and look back over her shoulder, and I knew that look. That was not a woman who took no for an answer. That was a woman recalculating. I told myself it was over. It was so far from over. For 3 days there was nothing, and I let myself believe the silence meant they'd given up. Then the voicemail came. It was Sadie, and I almost didn't recognize her voice because the last time I'd heard it she was 13 and telling on me for something I didn't do. Now she sounded soft and wounded and, if I'm honest, rehearsed. Hey Owen, it's me. Mom said she talked to you. I know it's a lot to ask and I feel weird even calling, but I'm kind of freaking out about the whole college thing, and having a real place would mean everything to me. You've always been so good at figuring stuff out on your own. I could really use your help. Please, call me back. I didn't call her back. And that wasn't cruelty. That was survival, because I knew that voice. Sadie had spent her whole life being helpless in the exact way that made everyone rush to catch her, and I had spent my whole life being the one nobody caught. I wasn't going to volunteer to be the floor again, just because she'd finally found an edge to stand on. But the voicemail told me something important. If Sadie was calling, the machine was already moving. 3 days later, I came out of work, and my mom was leaning against my car in the parking garage. No greeting, just, you've had time to think. I told you I'd think about it, I said. I didn't tell you to ambush me at my job. Don't be dramatic, she said, and I nearly laughed at how perfectly it matched 20 years of memory. Your sister is counting on this. Do you have any idea how selfish you look right now, sitting on all this space while she has nowhere to go? She has a dorm, I said. She has parents. She has a car you bought her. What she doesn't have is a claim on my apartment. My mom's face did something then, a small flash of something older and colder than anger. You always did think you were owed more than you got, she said. You'll regret this attitude. I asked her the one thing I'd wanted to ask for 8 years. Did you ever, even once, wonder where I slept that first night? She looked at me like I'd said it in another language. We knew you'd land on your feet, she said. You always did. And there it was. The whole tragedy folded into a single sentence. My survival had become the excuse for my abandonment. Because I hadn't broken, they got to pretend they hadn't tried to break me. She pushed off my car and walked away, heels clicking on the concrete, and I stood there in the cold with the distinct feeling that I'd just been threatened by my own mother in a parking garage and that she'd enjoyed it. 2 days after that, my phone started buzzing with names I hadn't seen in a decade. An uncle, 2 cousins, a woman who described herself as a family friend, and then guilt-tripped me for 4 paragraphs. They all sang the same song in slightly different keys. It's not right to abandon your sister. She's just a kid. You're doing so well. Why can't you share? One cousin actually wrote, wow, success really did change you. It was coordinated. My mom had gone out and built a story, and in that story I was a cold, rich stranger hoarding a mansion while poor, sweet Sadie shivered in the street. My actual apartment was 620 square feet with a radiator that clanked, but the truth was never the point. The narrative was set, and I was cast as the villain, and there is no arguing your way out of a role your family assigned you before you could talk. I could have fought it. I could have posted the whole story, the duffel bag, the sundown, the 8 years of silence. But I'd spent my whole childhood begging people to see what was really happening, and I was done auditioning for belief. So I stayed quiet, and I watched them mistake my silence for weakness, and I let them. The messages kept arriving in waves, timed like someone was working a phone tree. An aunt I'd met maybe twice told me she was praying for my hardened heart. A cousin sent a photo of me at 9 years old holding baby Sadie, captioned, "Remember when you loved her?" And I understood then that they'd gone hunting through old albums for the one one picture where I looked like the big brother the story needed and had aimed it at me like a weapon. My phone became a place I dreaded opening. I muted the family thread, then left it, then blocked the loudest of them, and every time I did, someone new would surface from an unfamiliar number as if losing my attention was the true betrayal. Not one of them ever asked what actually happened the summer I turned 18. Nobody wanted the answer. The version where I was cold and rich and cruel was so much easier to hold than the version where they'd all looked away while a woman set her own son out on the curb with a duffel bag. Then Sadie started showing up in person. First it was a text saying she was in the neighborhood. Then she was in my building's lobby when I got home, sitting on the little bench by the mailboxes with her knees pulled up, doing the wounded bird thing so well, I almost forgot she'd learned it from watching me get punished for years. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, and stepped around her toward the stairs. "You're the only one who can help me," she called after me. And the awful part was that she believed it. My family had raised her to see me not as a brother, but as a resource, a fund with legs, and now that they'd decided to make a withdrawal, they couldn't understand why the account was saying no. Then came the day it stopped being ugly and started being a crime. I was at my desk when my leasing office called, which never happened. I picked up braced for a burst pipe. Instead, the property manager said, cheerful as anything, "Just confirming you're vacating at the end of the month so we can process the transfer to your sister." I said, "The what?" "Your sister came by with paperwork, a sublease authorization with your signature. She said you were relocating for work and wanted her to take over the unit." My whole body went cold. "I never signed anything," I said. "I'm not moving. That signature is forged." There was a pause. "Oh," the manager said, quieter now. "She was very convincing. She had a whole folder." I left work. I don't remember the drive. When I got to my building, Sadie was in the lobby again, except this time she had a suitcase, and she looked up at me with the exact same innocent face she'd worn since she was 6 years old. "What did you do?" I said. She actually looked confused. "I was just moving things along. Mom said you'd come around, so I figured why wait? You forged my name on a legal document." She rolled her eyes. "It's not forging if it's family, Owen. It's basically ours anyway." That sentence told me everything. She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. In her world, I wasn't a person with a signature and a life. I was a formality standing between her and something she'd already been promised. I sent her home. That night I changed my locks, filed the forged sublease with the leasing office as fraud, and mounted a small camera above my door, and I told myself I was being paranoid. I wasn't being paranoid. A week later I came home to find fresh scratches around my new lock, and when I pulled up the camera footage my hands started shaking before my brain even caught up. It was my mother. She was standing at my door in the middle of a Tuesday working a key that didn't fit, and when the key failed she'd crouched down and tried to jimmy the deadbolt with something thin and metal. She wasn't wearing gloves. She wasn't even nervous. She kept glancing at her phone, and I realized she wasn't just breaking in. She was looking for something, and she thought she had time to find it. That was the moment the fear changed shape. Not fear that they'd hurt me, though I stopped ruling that out. Fear because I finally understood all the way down that these people did not see me as their son. They saw me as an obstacle, and obstacles are things you remove. I didn't sleep for a long time after that. I checked the peephole before I opened my own door in my own home. I flinched at footsteps in the stairwell. I started keeping the camera app open on my phone like a nervous tick, and then one night I just stopped. Sat down on the floor of my kitchen with my back against the cabinet and felt every bit of strength drain out of me like water down a slow drain. I didn't cry exactly. I just sat there in the dark, 26 years old, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, tired of building things people kept trying to take, tired of proving I existed to people who had decided I didn't. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. I didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. I let the dishes stack up and the phone go dark, and I sat on my couch replaying the footage of my mother picking my lock until the battery died. I stood in the shower one of those mornings until the water ran cold, not washing anything, just standing there, because it was the only place the noise of the water could drown out the noise in my head. I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't reach. Tired of being the strong one because nobody had ever offered me the option to fall apart. Tired of building a life brick by brick, while people who never lifted a finger circled it like it was theirs to inherit. Tired of proving I was real to an audience that had decided I wasn't before I could talk. I kept waiting to feel rage, and instead I just felt hollowed out and scraped clean, like every fight I had left in me had already been spent surviving the first 18 years. But somewhere in that flat, gray quiet, something turned over. I don't know what did it. Maybe it was watching her try that lock over and over, so calm, so sure. Maybe it was finally admitting how deep the wound actually went. But for the first time in my life, I stopped bracing for the next hit and started planning one of my own. I started with paper because paper is what I understood. I pulled every second of camera footage and backed it up 3 times, cloud, drive, email to myself. I saved Sadie's voicemail, screenshotted every guilt-trip text from every cousin, and photographed the scratches on my lock and the forged sublease the leasing office sent back. I built a timeline, clean and dated, the way I'd build a ledger. I turned my apartment into a case case file. Then I locked down my life the way I locked down a client's books. New passwords, two-factor on everything, a credit freeze on all 3 bureaus, fraud alerts flagged. And that's when the second shoe dropped, because when I pulled my own credit report to check, there was a card I'd never opened, in my name, 6 years old, opened the same year they threw me out. Someone had been using my identity since I was 18. I didn't have to guess who. I told my boss a version of the truth, that I had a family situation and some people might try to contact me at work. I expected awkwardness. Instead, he told me to take what I needed and had the front desk route any unfamiliar callers to voicemail. It's a strange thing, learning what basic decency feels like from a man who signs my paychecks, when the people who raised me couldn't manage it once. I used the time to find a lawyer. A friend of Ronnie's pointed me to a woman named Renata, sharp and unhurried, the kind of person who listens to a horror story without blinking and then asks one question that cuts to the bone. I laid it all out: the sundown eviction, the 8 years, the forged sublease, the break-in on camera, the credit card in my name. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You keep saying they threw you out. I want to know who had legal control of you and your money when you were a minor." I said I didn't understand the question. She leaned forward. "Owen, was there ever any money in your family? A grandparent, a trust, an inheritance, anything?" And I opened my mouth to say no, and then I stopped because I remembered something I hadn't thought about in 15 years. My grandmother, my mom's mother, who died when I was 11 and who had, at every holiday, put her hand on my cheek and told me she'd made sure her grandchildren would never have to struggle. I'd always assumed that was just something old people said. Renata did not assume. She requested the estate records the next morning. While we waited, I started seeing a therapist, a calm woman named Nadia, who refused to let me perform being fine. She caught the way I minimized, the way I said it wasn't that bad in the same breath as describing something that was, in fact, that bad. She didn't coddle me, and she didn't pity me. She just kept gently pointing at the shape of the thing until I could see it too. One session, I told her I'd never trust anyone again. She said maybe the goal wasn't trusting everyone. Maybe it was trusting myself enough to stop letting the wrong people close. I signed up for the CPA exam I'd been avoiding for 2 years, and I started going to a bouldering gym at night, which anyone who knew me would find hilarious. And somewhere between the chalk and the falling and the strangers cheering me up a wall, I started to feel like a person again. I made friends there, real ones, the kind who wanted nothing from me but a spot and a laugh. A guy named Wells, who poured concrete for a living and handed out terrible advice with total confidence. A woman named Sloane, who could outclimb everyone in the building and pretended not to notice when I couldn't stop watching her do it. I started sleeping through the night. I cooked meals that took longer than a microwave. I went on a couple of low-stakes dates and remembered that I was allowed to be wanted by people who didn't want something from me first. One evening I caught myself humming while I washed the dishes, and I had to stop and sit down because I could not remember the last time my hands had done something that wasn't bracing for the next hit. That was the strangest part of getting better. Not the big moments, the small ones. A quiet Tuesday where nothing was on fire and no one was at my door, and I got to just live in my own apartment like it belonged to me, because it did, but I hadn't forgotten. And 10 days later, Renata called, and her voice was doing something careful. "I have the estate documents," she said. "Owen, I need you to sit down." My grandmother had left a trust, not small, and it was split explicitly, evenly, between her 2 grandchildren, me and Sadie 50-50, with my parents named as trustees until each of us turned 25. The house my parents lived in, the house I grew up being told we could barely afford, had been purchased outright with trust money. And there was more. There was an education fund inside the trust, a specific sum set aside for each grandchild's college, my half and Sadie's half, released at the trustee's discretion for school. "Here's the part you need to hear," Renata said slowly. "Your half of the education fund. It's gone, all of it, withdrawn over the last 8 years. And every withdrawal lines up with a tuition payment, a car, a deposit, a dance program. Owen, they didn't just favor her. They spent your college fund on your sister. And then they told you there was no money and put you on the street." I don't remember standing up, but I was standing. The room tilted and reset. Every "no, we can't afford it." Every "you'll have to figure it out yourself." Every lecture about gratitude while I wore shoes that leaked, all of it collapsed into one clean, unforgivable fact. There had always been money, my money, and they'd fed it to her one withdrawal at a time while telling me I was a burden for existing. "So the eviction," I said, "that wasn't them being broke. That was them removing the only other person with a claim on the trust," Renata said. "The further away you were, the less likely you'd ever find out. You weren't a problem child, Owen. You were a witness." I sat with that word, witness. It rearranged my whole childhood in real time. The way my mom went stiff whenever my grandmother's name came up. The way any conversation about money ended with me being sent to my room. The gym equipment that appeared in my old bedroom within a week of me leaving. Not because they needed the space, but because they needed the erasure. Every cruelty I'd spent years trying to file under coldness or favoritism suddenly had a cleaner, uglier name. It was never that they loved me less. It's that I was expensive to keep honest. A daughter you spoil is an asset. A son who might one day read a bank statement is a liability. They didn't throw away their child. They liquidated a witness and called it tough love. For a second I couldn't breathe. And then then, strangely, I felt calm. The calm of a man who has finally been handed the one thing he was always missing: proof. What are my options? I said. As a beneficiary, you're entitled to a full accounting of the trust, she said. We can petition the court to compel it. Given what I'm seeing, we're looking at breach of fiduciary duty, likely misappropriation, possibly fraud. They'll be ordered to repay what they took, with the house as the obvious asset to satisfy it. And the transfer they're trying to pull, handing anything to Sadie, we can freeze that today. I thought about it. I thought about my mother crouched at my door with a piece of metal, looking for the very documents I was now holding. Don't freeze it yet, I said. Let them keep thinking I'm the same kid who packed a duffel and disappeared. I want them comfortable. I want them all the way out on the branch before I cut it. Renata studied me. You're planning something. I'm planning to make sure they never do this to anyone again. The setup took a month. Step 1 was information. I had Renata request every trust statement, every withdrawal record, every trustee filing. I cross-referenced all of it myself, line by line, because I'm an accountant, and this was the single most satisfying reconciliation of my life. Every dollar had a fingerprint. The paper trail wasn't a story anymore. It was a case. Step 2 was silence. I didn't respond to Sadie. I didn't answer my mother. I let a second, softer letter arrive, this one full of underlined words like family and forgiveness, ending with a line that made me laugh out loud alone in my kitchen. We hope you won't let old resentment cloud your judgment. Old resentment. They funded her life with my future and worried I might be holding a grudge. Step 3 was allies. I started with my cousin Becca, who'd texted me once during the guilt campaign, but had sounded more confused than cruel. When I told her the truth, all of it, she went silent for a long time and then said, I always wondered why you just disappeared. Your mom told everyone you ran off and cut us all out. That was the story. Of course it was. Becca, it turned out, had her own history of being iced out for the crime of asking too many questions at family dinners, and by the end of the call, she was in. Through her, I reached 2 more cousins and an aunt. Aunt Claire, my grandmother's youngest daughter, who had never trusted the way my parents lived in that house. Aunt Claire remembered my grandmother's wishes. She remembered being told at the funeral that everything was handled. She was, in her words, ready to handle it properly this time. Word moved quietly through the parts of the family my mother didn't control. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been shown the door for asking an inconvenient question. My cousin Nolan had been iced out years earlier for wanting to see the will after Grandma died, and had spent a decade assuming he was just being paranoid and difficult. He wasn't. Another cousin remembered Grandma at her last Christmas, promising that the grandchildren were provided for, all of them, equally, and she remembered because Grandma had said it twice, looking right at my mother when she did. One by one, the people who'd been quietly convinced they were the problem started comparing notes, and a picture assembled that no single one of us had ever been allowed to see whole. I handed them the timeline. Renata handed them the legal weight behind it, and a scattered handful of black sheep. Every one of us branded ungrateful for the same crime of noticing things became the one thing my mother had never planned for. Witnesses who could finally see each other. And then Sadie handed me the last piece herself. She left a voicemail, and this time she wasn't wounded. She was smug. Hey, Owen. So, heads up, Mom's getting everything finalized with the lawyer for the apartment, and honestly, it'd be way easier if you just signed. I get that you need to feel like you're in charge or whatever, but we're doing the big send-off dinner before I move to campus, the whole family, and it would be really nice if this was done by then so we can just celebrate. Don't make it weird. A send-off dinner, the whole family, a date. It was almost too perfect. I met Renata and we prepared everything. A petition to compel a full accounting of the trust, a notice of the forged sublease and the identity theft, a motion to freeze any transfer of the property, all of it drafted, reviewed, and ready to fire the moment I gave the word. But I had one more move. My grandmother's trust had a successor trustee clause and named other beneficiaries in the extended family, people who had a legal right to know the trust had been looted. Rather than a journalist, I did something cleaner. I prepared a single document, plain and factual, every withdrawal, every date, every lie set against the record, and I addressed it to every person my grandmother had ever included in her will. No spin, just the ledger. Because the most viral thing in a family isn't a rumor. It's the truth arriving all at once, to everyone, at the same time. I set the send-off dinner as the deadline in my head, and wrote a reminder on my phone. Close the books. On the night of the dinner, I didn't go, obviously, but Becca did. She'd agreed to one condition, that she'd keep her phone recording under the edge of the table the entire night. At 7:12, she texted, everyone's here. Your mom keeps saying tonight's a big night. At 7:26, they're bringing out champagne. Your dad's standing up. I opened my laptop and lined up the folder. Every document visible. Every filing one click from sent. Then Becca called and I answered, and there it was. The backyard of the house that was never theirs. String lights. A long table. My mother glowing at the head of it with Sadie beside her. My dad raised a glass. To Sadie, he said, loud enough for the phone to catch every word. Who's about to start the next chapter in a place of her own? Because in this family, we take care of our own. Polite applause. My mother pressed a hand to her chest like she might weep from joy. Sadie stood and lifted her glass and said, thank you all for believing in me. The apartment's basically sorted, so here's to new new beginnings. I texted Renata one word, now. Within a minute, the petition to compel the accounting hit the court's electronic filing system. The freeze on the property transfer went active. The fraud notice on the forged sublease and the identity theft landed in a formal complaint. And then I clicked send on my own document, the ledger, to every beneficiary my grandmother had ever named, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, the extended family that had spent a decade being told I was the one who left. Subject line, what was done with Grandma's trust. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to watch. The phone told me everything. By 8:40, Becca texted, your aunt just stood up at the table. By 8:52, your mom is screaming at your dad. Sadie's crying. Nobody's eating. By 9:15, Aunt Claire read the whole thing out loud, line by line, and the backyard went dead silent. By 9:41, your dad just drove off in the truck without your mom. Sadie deleted her big college post. Half the table's already gone. Then Renata emailed, confirmed, the transfer freeze is locked and the accounting petition is docketed. They can't move the house or a dollar of that trust without a judge now. Then, for 2 full days, silence. No calls, no knocks, no letters. Just the quiet before a house of cards remembers gravity. Renata called Monday. Their lawyer responded, she said, and I could hear the edge of a smile. It's a mess. They're claiming the withdrawals were legitimate family expenses. Owen, they put a car and a dance program on a document that says college fund. The records are their own signatures. This isn't a fight. This is a cleanup. Over the next weeks, it came apart faster than even I expected. The court ordered the full accounting, and the full accounting was exactly what I'd already reconstructed, dollar for dollar. My half of the education fund drained. $82,000 spent on the daughter they kept while I slept on a supply closet floor. The house, bought with trust money, ordered sold to satisfy the restitution and to finally split the estate the way my grandmother had written it 15 years ago. Their own lawyer stopped returning fire within 2 weeks because there was nothing left to argue. You cannot log a car and a semester of dance tuition as reasonable college expenses for a fund with my name on it, not when your own signature sits on every withdrawal slip. Renata filed one complaint over the forged sublease and a second over the credit card someone opened in my name the same year I turned 18, and each one pulled another brick out of the wall they'd spent a decade building around the truth. The judge didn't need a closing argument from me. The records closed it themselves, and the family my mother had spent a decade poisoning against me read the ledger and did the math. Aunt Claire called me herself and apologized for 8 years of believing a lie. Becca posted the summary in the family group with one line, funny how the person who got thrown away is the only one who kept the receipts. Cousins who'd called me heartless went quiet. My mother tried, of course. She sent a long message titled Our Side, full of the word sensitive and the phrase we did our best. Renata told me to save it. I did. The fallout didn't stay inside the family either. In a town that small, a court-ordered sale of a well-known house gets noticed, and people talk. A neighbor who'd lived beside my parents for 20 years messaged me out of nowhere to say she'd always wondered why they only ever mentioned one child, and that she was sorry she'd never thought to ask. Aunt Claire confronted my mother directly at a church function, in front of people, and asked how she stood up every Sunday knowing what she'd done to her own son. My mother, I heard, said I was twisting things, that I'd always been dramatic, that nobody understood how hard Sadie had been to raise. Nobody bought it this time. The ledger doesn't get dramatic. The ledger just adds up. Relatives who'd spent a decade forwarding me guilt trips went quiet, and a few of the ones with a conscience still working sent me careful little apologies I wasn't sure what to do with. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a word. I just let the numbers talk, because the numbers were the only thing in my family that had never once lied to me. Then Sadie called. I let it ring twice before I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "Why are you doing this to us?" And I thought about $82,000. I thought about a duffel bag and $80 and a bus pass that expired in 4 days. I thought about every A that wasn't enough and every pair of shoes that leaked. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I'm just collecting what was always mine. They're going to lose the house, she said, and her voice cracked, and for 1 second she sounded like a scared kid instead of a person who'd forged my name. Do you even care? I did care. That was the thing. I cared that for the rest of their lives, every time they told the story, they'd have to leave out the part where they got caught, and no version would work without it. No, I said. I care that they finally get to feel it. The settlement finalized on a Thursday. The house sold. After the restitution and the split my grandmother had written, my share came to $240,000, wired into an account they didn't know existed, opened at a bank they'd never set foot in. My parents had 90 days to vacate the house that was never theirs. The education fund they stole was repaid into my name. The exact amount they'd fed to Sadie, returned to the person it was written for. My mother sent one final message, no apology in it, just 5 words. I hope you're satisfied. I read it once, in the parking lot of my bank, right after the wire cleared. Then I put my phone in my pocket, and I didn't answer, because for the first time in my life, the numbers had come out in my favor and there was nothing left to add.